El Salvador is a country of dramatic contrasts. By day, its verdant hillsides and volcano-dotted horizons evoke a sense of serene, untouched beauty. By night, at least in years past, the specter of violence has too often taken hold of the streets, overshadowing the country's natural majesty with fear. For decades, local gangs wielded power in entire neighborhoods, seeking tributes and turning city blocks into battlegrounds, fueling a grim cycle of brutality. In the midst of these long-standing struggles, the Salvadoran government embarked on a project emblematic of its bid to restore peace: the construction of the nation's most secure prison, a facility designed to house the country's most hardened and violent offenders. Officially named the Terrorism Confinement Center, Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, or CCOT, but more infamously known simply as El Salvador's mega prison, it stands as the ultimate fortress, a place authorities assert is so secure that evil cannot escape. Within these fortified walls, thousands of inmates are kept under the tightest restrictions possible. For some, the prison represents the final stand against decades of rampaging criminality. For others, it poses deep moral questions about human rights, civil liberties, and the limits of law enforcement in a democratic society. What follows is a deeply reported account of the rise of El Salvador's most secure prison, how it was built, how it operates, who it incarcerates, and what it all means for the country, and perhaps the world, watching closely. Chapter 1: The Path to the Megaprison, a Legacy of Violence. The story of El Salvador's most secure prison cannot be divorced from the history that shaped its creation. Though the country's civil war ended decades ago in 1992, El Salvador continued to experience rampant violence, fueled particularly by gangs such as MS-13, Mara Salvatrucha, and Barrio 18. These groups, formed partly by deportees returning from the United States in the 1990s, evolved into influential criminal networks that extended across neighborhoods, controlling territories through fear and extortion. By the mid-2010s, El Salvador had one of the highest homicide rates in the world, a statistic that repeatedly drew global attention. Everyday life for many Salvadorans was fraught with anxiety. Commuters feared crossing gang-delineated boundaries, business owners dreaded the daily protection fee, and parents worried about youth recruitment or violent reprisals. Behind these anxieties lay a broader question: could the Salvadoran state restore security to its population? Political will and public demand. A wave of public discontent over rising crime prompted candidates to promise bold solutions. Ultimately, President Nayib Bukele, elected in 2019, cemented his reputation as a reformer willing to crack down on crime. With broad public approval, he declared a war on gangs, an initiative that included controversial constitutional reforms, heavy-handed policing, mass arrests, and a plan to construct a new prison designed expressly for the most dangerous gang members. For Bukele's supporters, the objective was straightforward. If traditional prisons were overcrowded and incapable of containing gang networks, then a larger, more modern, and more authoritarian facility might serve as the ultimate deterrent, a physical embodiment of the government's vow to end gang violence. Critics, however, saw the move as raising red flags, citing the potential for human rights abuses and authoritarian drift. Still, the project plowed ahead with remarkable speed. Engineering a fortress, plans for El Salvador's megaprison included architectural input from international firms specializing in maximum security designs, along with local engineers who understood the country's volatile geography. The resulting blueprint featured towering perimeter walls, advanced surveillance systems, and labyrinthine internal corridors, each aspect carefully calibrated to minimize inmate movement and communication. In short, it was to be a place that criminals found impossible to leave, both physically and psychologically. Financing came through government-backed bonds, reallocation of defense and internal security budgets, and behind-the-scenes deals with private contractors. Though the final cost remains a matter of debate, estimates range in the hundreds of millions of dollars, there was never any doubt about the state's intention to spare no expense. In many ways, the construction of this facility mirrored the Salvadoran public's fierce desire for a tangible, immediate solution to the unrelenting cycle of violence. Chapter 2: Inside the architecture of control walls that speak as you approach the prison. The first thing you notice is the sheer scale of its outer walls. Rising over 30 feet, they encircle an area that dwarfs older facilities, making it one of the largest detention centers in Central America. The concrete is layered with reinforced steel, and guard towers sprout at intervals, providing a 360-degree vantage point. High-intensity floodlights keep the perimeter lit at all hours. Officials say these walls are engineered to resist external assault or internal breakout attempts. The robust design is accentuated by motion detectors, heat sensors, and razor wire fences. Patrol dogs trot alongside armed security personnel who work in shifts so as never to leave a gap. Every detail, from the angles of the walls to the thickness of the gates, is a testament to the belief that no one is getting in or out without express permission. Security in layers. Entering the prison itself requires passing through multiple checkpoints. The first gate is manned by uniformed guards who inspect vehicles. The second involves biometric scans for staff, fingerprints, facial recognition, and sometimes iris scans depending on the level of clearance. Beyond that, staff and visitors must pass through specialized metal detectors and full-body scanners to ensure no contraband enters. Every step forward is tracked, recorded, and regulated. Within the facility, the layout emphasizes restricted movement. Inmates are housed in blocks that connect to common areas via electronically locked corridors. Security cameras stare down from every corner, feeding into a centralized control room. This nerve center is staffed by a rotation of analysts who monitor hundreds of live feeds, scanning the monitors for any hint of disturbance. Should an incident arise, an alarm triggers an immediate lockdown of all corridors. Invisible barriers technology underpins the mega prison's advanced approach to control. Cell phone signals are jammed across the entire complex, rendering communication with the outside world virtually impossible without specialized equipment. Radio frequencies, Wi-Fi, and other electromagnetic waves are likewise restricted. In a nation where gang leaders frequently coordinated with associates from within prison walls, these measures reflect the government's intent to sever all lines of clandestine communication. In theory, this means that every text message, phone call, or data transfer is blocked, forcing the facility to rely on its own closed circuit of communication for staff operations. Guards carry radios that operate on secure frequencies. A separate server system stores all digital logs of staff arrivals, inmate movements, and daily operations. The message is clear: the outside world might as well be on another planet. Chapter 3. The Inmates, who ends up here and why. Rounding up suspects under President Bukele's administration, El Salvador declared a state of emergency, enabling mass arrests of suspected gang members. Police and soldiers fanned out to known gang strongholds, detaining thousands in sweeping raids. Critics labeled the approach "dragnet justice," pointing to the risk of incarcerating innocent people caught up in the panic. Yet many Salvadorans applauded, believing these arrests would remove the major threats from their communities. The mega prison became the logical repository for the most dangerous, or at least the most suspected, members of the gangs. Transport convoys carried these detainees directly to the facility in heavily guarded processions. Clad in white jumpsuits, heads shaved, bodies covered in gang tattoos, the new arrivals were often escorted in lines, bent at the waist, hands behind their backs, surrounded by armed guards. Footage of these transfers went viral, serving as a powerful visual of an administration intent on reclaiming the streets. Classification and cell blocks. Upon arrival, inmates undergo a rigorous intake process. Identification photos are taken, tattoos documented, and personal data recorded. Gang affiliation, MS-13, Barrio 18, or smaller cliques is noted, ensuring that prison officials know exactly who they're housing. The prison is structured so that rival gangs are kept in separate wings, minimizing the risk of violent clashes. Cell blocks vary in size and security tier. The highest-risk inmates, suspected of orchestrating murders or serving as high-level gang leaders, live in near-permanent lockdown. Their cells are small, outfitted with only the barest necessities: a bed slab, stainless steel toilet, and sink. Some blocks are reportedly so strict that inmates are not even permitted reading materials or personal items, reinforcing the psychological weight of total isolation. Other blocks allow for limited yard time, but under constant guard supervision. Innocent or guilty, Critics allege that not all who end up in these walls are guilty. In a country with a shaky judicial system, mass arrests can result in detentions based on tenuous evidence. Human rights organizations have documented stories of individuals with only tangential links to gang members, such as living in the same neighborhood or sharing a family name, finding themselves behind the fortress gates. Bukele's government denies these accusations, insisting that each inmate has ties to organized crime. Regardless of the debate, once inside, the lines between guilt and innocence become blurred by the brutality of prison life. Inmate testimonies, collected by NGOs when possible, describe a relentless routine of head counts, meager rations, and near-constant surveillance. The environment fosters a culture where only the toughest or most cunning survive. Others become lost in a system that, by design, offers few second chances. Chapter 4: Daily Life Within the Fortress. Monotony and tension. Life inside El Salvador's most secure prison is defined by a grueling monotony. Every hour is tightly structured. Prisoners wake at dawn to the clanging of doors and barked orders over loudspeakers. They line up for mandatory head counts. Meals, such as they are, arrive at set intervals. Guards supervise every movement, and stepping out of line can result in solitary confinement or other forms of punitive action. The day's routine rarely changes. There is no vocational training, little education, and minimal recreational time. Some blocks do not permit any communal gathering at all. While other prisons in the country occasionally offer workshops or religious services, the mega prisons administrators argue that these men are beyond rehabilitation, at least for now. The stark environment is deliberate, designed to deny them any chance to plan escape or coordinate criminal activities. Meals and medical care. Food is basic, nutrient calculated but minimal in variety. Breakfast might include beans, tortillas, and a cup of watery coffee. Lunch and dinner offer a rotation of rice, beans, or basic stew. Fresh produce is scarce, and inmates complain of chronic hunger and malnutrition. This is not an accident. Authorities see no reason to pamper individuals deemed responsible for terrorizing neighborhoods. Medical care exists, but is equally austere. Doctors conduct periodic checks, especially for infectious diseases like tuberculosis, which can ravage overcrowded institutions. Still, reports suggest that inmates often wait weeks for treatment of injuries or sickness. Guard staff stress that resources are limited, and priority goes to ensuring security over comfort. Isolation in the mind. The psychological toll of extended isolation is profound. Inmates in maximum lockdown rarely see natural light for more than an hour per day. Conversations with other prisoners are discouraged, and in some blocks, even speaking at normal volumes can prompt disciplinary measures. This environment can push some inmates into despair, psychological breakdown, or further violence. Incidents of self-harm occur, and tensions can explode in sporadic outbursts that guards quickly suppress. Yet, for those who have grown up amid violence, day-to-day survival remains the dominant mindset. Some attempt to align themselves with stronger factions within the prison. Others try to keep their heads down, hoping for eventual release or transfer to a less restrictive environment. The flicker of hope that justice might be found in the legal system sustains a small minority. For many, though, life in the fortress is a slow, inevitable crush of the spirit. Chapter 5: Security on Steroids. Guard culture and technology. Armed and alert. While the inmates languish in Spartan conditions, the prison guards operate with advanced equipment and training. Armed with semi-automatic rifles, tear gas launchers, and body armor, they patrol corridors, towers, and common areas. A select group of officers, often drawn from elite police or military units, specialize in riot control and tactical operations. Their presence is a constant reminder to inmates that any attempt at insurrection will be met with swift force. Guards work on rotating shifts, often logging long hours in high-pressure environments. While some find pride in their role as the front line of national security, others struggle with stress and the moral complexity of managing detainees who are automatically assumed to be beyond redemption. PTSD, depression, and burnout are real concerns, although the administration invests heavily in specialized training to help guards remain focused and unyielding. Cutting-edge surveillance. Behind the scenes, technology further tightens security. A robust camera system blankets almost every square foot of the interior. Motion sensors track unusual movements in hallways, while advanced analytics software flags suspicious inmate behavior, such as attempts to communicate in coded gestures. The control room, sometimes referred to as the eye of the prison, has monitors stacked in rows, each feeding live visuals. Operators can zoom in on a single cell door or switch to a wide-angle view of an entire block in seconds. In the yard, drones occasionally buzz overhead during the limited outdoor time, capturing angles that cameras can't reach. Some blocks have door sensors linked to alarms that automatically lock the entire corridor, if triggered. Coupled with the high-tech jamming systems that block any external signals, these measures combine into a fortress of digital oversight that, at least in principle, eliminates the possibility of unnoticed conspiracies or escapes. Intelligence gathering. There is another dimension to the fortress's security strategy: intelligence gathering. Each inmate is mapped not just by physical location, but also by social connections. The Prison Intelligence Unit works with police and external agencies to piece together a web of affiliations, ranking inmates by threat level. Interrogations are conducted periodically, either to glean information about ongoing gang activities outside or to uncover rivalries that might fuel violence inside. Such intelligence efforts can be crucial in dismantling gang networks on the outside. However, they also raise ethical concerns, particularly if inmates are coerced into providing information or face collective punishment for refusing. In a setting where official oversight is minimal and access to legal representation is restricted, abuses can remain hidden for months or years. Chapter 6: Controversies and Criticisms. Human rights and legal debates. From an international perspective, El Salvador's mega-prison has drawn a barrage of criticism. Human rights organizations decry the harsh conditions, the indefinite nature of confinement, and the lack of transparency in judicial processes. Some detainees languish without formal charges, an outgrowth of emergency decrees that loosened the standards of evidence. Critics accuse the government of using fear to justify indefinite detentions. Meanwhile, legal experts question whether the mass detention strategy is constitutionally valid. They argue that widespread incarceration without robust due process threatens the rule of law. In a democratic society, they contend, even the worst offenders deserve legal representation and a clear timetable for trial. The government's stance that public safety concerns override these issues continues to polarize El Salvador's population. Claims of torture and abuse. Various reports, some leaked from within the prison, paint a grim picture of potential abuses. Allegations range from guards withholding food and water to physical beatings for minor rule violations. Some inmates claim to have been placed in stress positions for extended periods, a method recognized by many international bodies as a form of torture. The government denies these accounts, stating that all disciplinary actions follow protocol. The question of oversight remains murky. Journalists rarely gain access. Independent monitors find the prison administrators uncooperative or slow to respond to inquiries. Occasionally, official tours present a sanitized version of the facility, spotless hallways and well-kept communal spaces. But critics argue these tours rarely reflect everyday realities. As a result, the truth of daily life in the fortress remains opaque, fueling speculation and concern. Effectiveness versus overreach. On the flip side, supporters of the prison point to an undeniable drop in homicides and gang-related violence across the country. The government touts these metrics as evidence that their crackdown is working. Crime is down, extortion is curtailed, and a sense of normalcy is returning to streets once paralyzed by fear. Many Salvadorans express gratitude, arguing that the oppressive environment inside the fortress is a necessary evil to secure peace. Still, observers question whether these gains can be sustained without addressing root causes like poverty, unemployment, and social marginalization. They note that suppressing violence by brute force often leads to cyclical conflicts, with new forms of crime emerging if deeper issues remain unaddressed. For now, the fortress stands as both a symbol of immediate relief and an emblem of potential overreach, capturing El Salvador's precarious balance between security and freedom. Chapter 7. Glimpses from inside, voices of inmates and guards. A former gang leader speaks. Though interviews with inmates are strictly limited, a handful of NGOs have managed to collect testimonies through intermediaries. One such account comes from a reputed MS-13 leader who found himself in the fortress after a crackdown in a San Salvador neighborhood. He admitted to orchestrating extortion schemes and attacks on rival factions, yet insisted that not all detainees are guilty. The men in here, he allegedly told an intermediary, are some of the worst you can imagine. But there are also boys who just got caught up in the raids. They're rotting beside murderers. The guilt or innocence doesn't matter here. We're all the same to the guards. Asked about daily life, he described the unrelenting monotony, the sense of claustrophobia, and the fear that any day could bring a beating from guards or a betrayal by a fellow inmate. A guard's perspective. On the other side, a senior guard supervisor gave a rare anonymous interview to a local journalist. "We do what we have to do," he said. "These people have terrorized communities for years, kidnapped, raped, murdered. It's not our job to be gentle. Our job is to keep them inside and keep them from harming one another." Yet even he acknowledged the emotional toll of working in a facility so steeped in tension. "I'll say it's not easy. You go home at the end of a shift, and you've spent your day barking orders, checking cells, dealing with men who have no hope. Some of them will never leave this place, and you see it in their eyes. It wears on you." Chapter 8. The Bigger Picture, Lessons and Legacies. International reactions. Governments in neighboring countries, also grappling with gang violence, watch El Salvador's experiment with a mix of envy and alarm. Some officials in Guatemala or Honduras suggest that a similar approach might bring relief to their own crime-ridden communities. Others fear that El Salvador's model encourages an authoritarian style of governance that could undermine constitutional freedoms. International bodies, including the United Nations, have expressed concern over alleged human rights abuses, calling for greater transparency. Beyond Central America, policymakers from regions struggling with organized crime, whether in Africa, Asia, or even parts of Europe, find themselves contemplating the trade-offs behind such a facility. Is it acceptable for human rights to take a back seat if a society is truly threatened by rampant violence? Or does going down this path erode the principles of justice that underlie democratic institutions? Supporters of the fortress point to promising economic upticks. Tourism is slowly returning, and foreign investors once deterred by violence are taking cautious steps toward investing in El Salvador. Families in rural villages feel safer, local businesses can flourish without oppressive gang taxes, and many young Salvadorans see new opportunities. However, sociologists argue that the deeper problems, inequality, marginalization, and a weak judicial system, remain unaddressed. They warn that relying on mass incarceration as a long-term fix might backfire once the immediate crisis passes, leading to an underclass of permanently branded felons, resentful and cut off from reintegration. A model or a warning? The fortress stands in many ways as a bold experiment. For some, it's a successful crackdown on criminal power. For others, it's a cautionary tale about the perils of setting aside civil liberties. The truth may lie somewhere in between, shaped by the evolving social and political realities of El Salvador itself. In the coming years, the facility's success or failure could influence broader strategies around the world. The question is whether it will serve as a model, prompting more mega-prisons in the fight against violent crime, or as a warning, illustrating the moral and practical pitfalls of concentrating so many desperate men within a single, oppressive institution. Epilogue: a prison of hope or despair. Inside El Salvador's most secure prison, life unfolds in a grim cycle of lockdowns and suspicion. Outside, Salvadorans walk the streets with a newfound sense of freedom, albeit tempered by uncertainty about the methods used to achieve it. In a land where violence has long cast a shadow over everyday existence, the fortress has become a focal point of debate. Is it a necessary bulwark against unstoppable brutality, or is it merely sowing the seeds of future unrest? For now, the towers loom under the tropical sun, and the men locked away inside them vanish from the public eye. Official pronouncements declare that evil cannot escape those walls, a rallying cry for a nation struggling to break free of its own ghosts. Yet whether the fortress stands as a testament to lasting security or a relic of overreach will depend on the next chapter of El Salvador's history, which is still being written day by day. In the end, the story of El Salvador's mega prison is about more than just bricks and steel. It is about the intersection of fear, justice, and the human costs of security. Perhaps the prison is both a success and a travesty. A fortress built to contain society's worst impulses, and a monument to a world where we wrestle, still, with the question of how to balance order and freedom in the face of evil. Human rights groups have criticized a crackdown on crime, accusing the government of empowering itself to act with impunity. Inmates accused of belonging to the MS-13 and 18th Street gangs arrive at a new mega prison called the Center for the Confinement of Terrorism in Tecoluca, 75 kilometers, 45 miles southeast of San Salvador. The first 2,000 inmates of a new prison built in El Salvador to accommodate more than 40,000 suspected gang members targeted in President Nayib Bukele's war on crime have arrived at the facility. Bukele tweeted on Friday, "At dawn, in a single operation, we transferred the first 2,000 members to the Center for the Confinement of Terrorism, CIHOT, which he said is the largest prison in the Americas. This will be their new house, where they will live for decades, all mixed, unable to do any further harm to the population," the president said. Human rights organizations said the state of emergency Bukele has used to make the arrests has led to serious human rights violations. Among them are mass arbitrary detention, torture and other forms of ill treatment against detainees, deaths in custody, and abuse-ridden prosecutions, Human Rights Watch said in a statement. Bukele posted a video showing barefoot, tattooed men wearing only white boxers, bent over with their hands behind their shaven heads. Each inmate sat with his legs on either side of the man in front of him, as armed guards in balaclavas guarded the prisoners. They were loaded onto buses, hands and feet in shackles, to be taken to the new prison in a convoy that included helicopters. At the new facility, the men were similarly lined up before being led in large groups into their cells, where they are left sitting on the floor next to stacked metal beds. The warden told journalists while unveiling the facility that no mattresses would be provided. "We are eliminating this cancer from society," Justice and Public Security Minister Gustavo Villatoro said on Twitter about the inmates. "Know that you will never walk out of CIHOT. You will pay for what you are." "Cowardly terrorists," he said. The first 2,000 inmates were transferred on February 24, 2023, to what El Salvador's government calls the largest prison in the Americas. It was built to house 40,000 suspected gang members. The prison is equipped with high-tech surveillance and is part of President Nayib Bukele's crackdown on gangs. It began in March and has led to the arrests of more than 63,000 suspected gang members. Gangs have an estimated 70,000 members in the Central American country. Bukele ordered the prison to be built after he declared a war on gangs. The operation's mass arrests have caused killings and extortion to plummet, and opinion polls show more than 90% of the public approves of the crackdown, despite evidence of abuses. The mega prison consists of 8 buildings made of reinforced concrete. Each of the prison's buildings has 32 cells of about 100 square meters, 1,075 square feet, designed to hold more than 100 inmates, according to Public Works Minister Romeo Rodriguez. Each cell has 2 sinks and 2 toilets. There are 80 metal bunks for every 100 prisoners, and human rights groups and observers have criticized the construction as a violation of incarceration standards. There will be no mattresses in the cells, the prison warden, who wore a ski mask to protect his identity, told journalists when the project was unveiled. The prison is equipped with dining halls, exercise rooms, and table tennis tables, but they are exclusively for guards' use. Prisoners will leave their cells only for legal hearings conducted by video conference or to be punished in windowless, unlit isolation cells. El Salvador's Legislative Assembly has repeatedly renewed a state of emergency for the gang crackdown. It suspends some constitutional rights and gives police more powers to arrest and hold suspects in the violence-plagued country. A plane carrying scores of Venezuelan prisoners touched down in El Salvador on Sunday, cementing a landmark deal with the Trump administration to house suspected gangsters abroad. The prisoners, alleged to be associated with the Tren de Aragua and MS-13 gangs, were deported even after a U.S. federal judge blocked their removals, and the government is yet to supply any detail of their supposed gang affiliation. More than 200 Venezuelans will now be transferred to the Supermax Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, CO, in Tecoluca, a sprawling complex for thousands of hardened gangsters and a symbol of Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele's harsh crackdown on gang violence since it opened in 2023. For the strongman president of El Salvador, the $6 million deal with the United States is an opportunity to show the world the brutal efficacy of his repressive state of exception regime, an excess of the growing autocratic trend turning its back on liberal democracy. For the prisoners, a black hole of human rights awaits, according to monitoring groups. At least 363 people have died in Salvadoran prisons since the policy came into effect, rights group Cristasol told Mail Online, many citing horrific overcrowding, disease, systematic denial of food, clothing, medicine, and basic hygiene. The jewel in the crown, CICOT, has been heralded by Bukele as a superweapon in the war on gang violence. Confined to cells of 70 for all but 30 minutes a day, prisoners are held in dire conditions, forbidden from going outside or having visitors, and are made to sleep on steel cots without mattresses in cramped conditions. As Venezuelans alleged to be gang members arrived in El Salvador to join some 20,000 of the country's most hardened criminals, Mail Online looks at the conditions inside Bukele's CICOT fortress. Guards at the Terrorism Confinement Center, CICOT, transferring alleged gang members on Sunday. Guards at the Terrorism Confinement Center, transferring alleged members of the criminal gang known as Tren de Aragua in San Luis Talpa, El Salvador, 16th of March 2025. Bukele, in a meeting last month with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, offered to house prisoners from the United States in his country. Salvadoran police officers escort an alleged member of the Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, to be imprisoned at CICOT on Sunday. The United States sent over 130 suspected members of the Tren de Aragua gang. Salvadoran police officers escort alleged members of the Tren de Aragua, recently deported by the U.S. government, to be imprisoned in the Terrorism Confinement Center, CICOT prison. The CICOT maximum security prison was built in 2023 in the context of the state of exception, a national policy ostensibly aimed at tackling sprawling gang violence with a rigorous crackdown on alleged gang members. Bukele has identified the worst offenders as members of the MS-13 and Calle 18 gangs, groups that emerged in the wake of the 1979 to 1992 Salvadoran Civil War, a 12-year conflict between the US-backed government and a coalition of left-wing guerrilla groups backed by Cuba's Fidel Castro and the USSR. As refugees fled north to the United States for a better life, many sought protection from other local gangs and joined factions. When the war ended, the conflict followed them home. A wave of attacks in recent years have seen the deaths of scores of civilians on Salvadoran soil. Extortion, drug trafficking, and brutal killings became commonplace, with non-combatants among those directly targeted by the gangs. With this came support for a more sweeping response from the state. Bukele declared a state of exception in March 2022 and commissioned CICOT soon after to be opened in January 2023. The state of exception, a concept outlined by Nazi jurist Carl Schmitt in the 1920s, is a right enshrined in the Constitution that allows the state to temporarily suspend certain guaranteed rights under special circumstances in order to restore public order. Rights groups say the policy's use in El Salvador has seen thousands of arbitrary detentions, torture, and hundreds of deaths in state custody, as well as the use of rape against women and children, and the forced disappearances of those deemed internal enemies of the state. CICOT is the most vivid symbol of the new order. At the base of a towering volcano and miles from civilization, huge concrete walls separate some 20,000 of the country's most violent prisoners from the rest of society. Soon after construction emerged polished photos of 2,000 of the country's most hardened criminals subjugated, humiliated, and in chains inside a plain and utilitarian prison complex in Tecoluca. El Salvador has managed to go from being the world's most dangerous country to the safest country in the Americas, Bukele said at the time. How did we do it? By putting criminals in jail, Strongman President Nayib Bukele boasts of how members of the brutal MS-13 and Cale 18 gangs, a long-standing blight on the country's security and reputation, are deprived of the most basic luxuries inside his unprecedented penal fortress. The arrival of alleged members of the Venezuelan criminal organization Tren de Aragua at the Terrorism Confinement Center in the city of Tecoluca. Salvadoran police officers cut the hair of alleged members of the Venezuelan gang. Tren de Aragua. The arrival of prisoners at CICOT on Sunday. The cells, each designed to hold 65 to 70 prisoners, are stark and devoid of basic comforts. Prisoners are made to run while leaning forwards with their hands cuffed behind their backs as they move into the prison. Feb 2023, MS-13 and Cale 18 emerged among the refugees who fled to the United States for the hope of a better life. Inmates at CICOT endure some of the most stringent restrictions seen in modern prisons. Cells designed to hold 65 to 70 prisoners are stark and devoid of basic comforts. Each cell has 2 toilets and 2 sinks to share between all. Inmates collect drinking water from a plastic barrel like animals. At full capacity, each inmate will have just 0.6 square meters within shared cells, the FT estimates. Prisoners can only leave their cramped cells once a day for 30 minutes of exercise inside the prison's large central corridor. They sleep on metal cots without mattresses or pillows and are ground down on a strict diet of rice, pasta, tortillas, beans, and cream, with meat expressly prohibited. To guard the prison, a crack team of 800 prison staff kitted out with riot gear patrols the hallways. Inmates are deprived entirely of their right to privacy, watched 24 hours a day with CCTV cameras. The few areas in the prison carved out for respite, break rooms, dining halls, a gym, are reserved for the guards. No books are allowed. Despite the cramped conditions, isolation poses a challenge for those expecting never to leave. Inmates cannot receive visitors, and judicial hearings only take place via video link. While prisoners are regularly frisked and checked for contraband, the prison has a jammer to stop information getting out. Due to the broader lack of transparency, the well-being of prisoners is underreported. But according to CBS, prisoners who need medical attention are treated within the modules, so no prisoner ever leaves the premises alive. Staff are aware of the problems inside CICOT and boast of overcrowding cells. The BBC asked the director last year what the capacity of each cell was. Where you can fit 10 people, you can fit 20, he replied, appearing to smile from behind his anti-COVID mask. While no expense was spared building the colossal prison, the facility has no windows, fans, or air conditioning, meaning temperatures soar upwards of 95°F or 35°C. A prison guard stands behind a huddle of alleged gang members as they are processed on their arrival, after 2,000 gang members were transferred to the Terrorism Confinement Center. Inmates attend class on social behavior during a press tour of the Terrorism Confinement Center, or CICOT, in Tecoluca, El Salvador, Thursday, October 12, 2023. Most of those inside the prison expect that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There is no hope of rehabilitation or a return to civilized society with good behavior. Inmates wait to be attended by health personnel. During a tour in the Terrorism Confinement Center complex, which according to El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, is designed to hold 40,000 inmates in Tecoluca, El Salvador, October 12, 2023. Until now, successive governments have struggled to deal with violence spilling across Salvador. In 2015, it had a daily homicide rate of 18.2, and it regularly appears at the top of charts ranking nations by their homicides per 100,000 people. The country's president, Nayib Bukele, claims the mega prison is the solution. Most of those living inside the prison expect to die there. There is no hope of rehabilitation or a return to civilized society with good behavior. This is something accepted by prison staff. Director Belarmino Garcia told the AFP news agency that the inmates were psychopaths who will be difficult to rehabilitate. That's why they are here, in a maximum security prison that they will never leave, he said. On the rare occasion that prisoners are allowed to speak to the press, they are careful in how they relay their experience. Inmate Marvin Vasquez, a member of the MS-13 gang, told CBS News during a visit this month, We murdered a lot of people, and this is the consequence of what happened to us, is like the Titanic. That we were a big and strong gang, but we got hit with the iceberg. We try to act strong in the day and cry in the nighttime, he said. A 41-year-old man, nicknamed Seiko, told AFP that he regretted his past, but knew that we are in a maximum security prison where we know there is no way out. Marvin Medrano, serving a 100-year sentence for 2 murders, told AFP he regretted his bad decisions and hoped his son would take a different path. I have lost my family. We've lost everything in prison, Medrano told the visiting reporters. As observed by the Associated Press, there are no programs preparing them to return to society after their sentences. No workshops or educational programs. They are never allowed outside. The exceptions are occasional motivational talks from prisoners who have gained a level of trust from prison officials. Prisoners sit in rows in the corridor outside their cells for the talks, or are led through exercise regimens under the supervision of guards. Human rights organizations have denounced abuses and due process violations in the country's crackdown, but El Salvador has one of the highest crime rates in Latin America. Inmates take part in a class during a tour in the Terrorism Confinement Center, HEAT complex, which according to El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, is designed to hold 40,000 inmates in Tecoluca, El Salvador. October 12, 2023. Lines and lines of prisoners sit with their heads down in formation as guards in riot gear look on. The lack of educational or vocational programs means that prisoners have no chance of growth or atonement. The absence of such programs has been criticized as a violation of the inmates' rights to education and rehabilitation. By contrast, even Britain offers prisoners programs and interventions that aim to change the thinking, attitudes, and behaviors which may lead people to reoffend. In most cases, 74.5%, successful rehabilitation programs allow prisoners to reintegrate and becoming contributing working members of society again. For prisoners in El Salvador's CICOT, the choice between reoffending and redemption does not exist. When Human Rights Commissioner of El Salvador, Andrés Guzmán, visited the notorious prison early on, he insisted the inmates are in good condition and their human rights are being respected. But rights groups have since compared the conditions in the prison as something similar to the concentration camps used by Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. Miguel Sarre, a former member of the United Nations Subcommittee for the Prevention of Torture, told the BBC that the prison appeared to be used to dispose of people without formally applying the death penalty. Monitoring groups have also described the prison as a black hole for human rights. Prison officials stand guard on a pavilion inside the Counterterrorism Confinement Center. Inside each cell, inmates are forced to share just 2 toilets and 2 sinks. They shower with water from a large basin inside their cells and collect drinking water from a plastic barrel. A second group of 2,000 detainees are moved overnight to the Mega Prison Terrorist Confinement Center, CICOT, on March 15, 2023. They say it fits into the wider picture of a state of exception by which the government has overseen the return of torture, forced disappearances, and arbitrary detentions established practically as state policy. Noah Bullock, director at Cristasol, told Mail Online that the lack of transparency surrounding the prison crackdown has made it hard for rights groups to fully report on the conditions inside. Testimonies gathered by Cristasol from former prisoners across El Salvador, detained during the state of exception, decried horrific overcrowding, disease, systematic denial of food, clothing, medicine, basic hygiene, he said. Cristasol has also documented credible evidence of rape and sexual assault against women and children detained under the state of exception. These intentionally harsh conditions are combined with acts of systematic physical torture that have led to the deaths of at least 363 people, he said, noting that the figure could be higher. The group reported only last summer that 261 people had died in El Salvador's prisons since the crackdown began in March 2022. The Socorro Jurídico Humanitario Rights Group estimates that almost a third of those detained under the state of exception are innocent. Confounding matters, journalists have allegedly been threatened with prison for news media that reproduces or disseminates messages from the gangs, alarming press freedom groups. While the U.S. government once warned that the state of exception had seen arbitrary arrests and undermined due process, while exacerbating difficult conditions in overcrowded prisons, the decision to deport more than 200 suspected Venezuelan criminals implies an attitude shift under the new Trump administration. The Sicat mega prison in Tecoluca has become a symbol of El Salvador's harsh crackdown on gang violence since it was built in 2023. After decades of unchecked violence, some citizens still welcome a radical move that promises to keep streets clean and safe. But while the prison's harsh conditions may serve as a deterrent to criminal activity, they also raise profound ethical and human rights concerns. Locals warn that people are being arbitrarily designated internal enemies of the state and systematically rounded up to be caged in conditions unbefitting of any living creature. Once accused, they are completely unprotected against the repressive power of the state and may soon find themselves sentenced to tens or hundreds of years in a brutal penitentiary with no contact with the rest of the world. When Guantanamo Bay opened in 2002, the reaction from Europe was one of disgust. The Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben described the indefinite detention of non-citizens in the U.S. as a state of exception, with the potential to turn a democracy into a totalitarian state. 2 decades later, a new political landscape has allowed Sicat to stand in El Salvador in the context of another state of exception, this time with an implied blessing from a U.S. administration willing to send suspected criminals to its cells. Rights groups will jostle to decide how history will remember the Salvadoran prison experiment. For the prisoners inside, all there is to do is wait. Built to house El Salvador's most dangerous gangsters, conditions at the maximum security terrorism confinement center are slammed by rights groups as inhumane. Yet U.S. President Donald Trump has praised the tough tactics of his gang-busting Salvadoran counterpart Nayib Bukele as an example, and is considering designating El Salvador a safe third country to which to deport undocumented migrants, according to U.S. media reports. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will visit the country on his first trip to Central America, starting later this week. The sprawling Sicat, on the edge of a jungle about 75 kilometers, 47 miles southeast of the capital San Salvador, is the centerpiece of Bukele's war on street gangs. Some 15,000 members of the MS-13 and rival Barrio 18 gangs are being held at the nearly 2-year-old facility, which can hold up to 40,000. They were rounded up under a state of emergency imposed by Bukele after a surge in gang violence in 2022. Some are serving sentences of over 200 years. Bukele's crackdown on gangs has been praised by many Salvadorans for leading to a drastic drop in the murder rate. But rights groups slam abuses in prisons, saying inmates are forced to confess and refuse contact with their families and lawyers. The inmates at Sicat leave their cells only when they have court hearings by video link from a room in the prison, or to exercise for half an hour a day in a large hallway. They shower with water from a large basin inside their cells and collect water from a large plastic barrel to drink. Their staple diet is beans or pasta, with the government expressly prohibiting meat. About 1,000 prison officers, 600 soldiers, and 250 riot police guard the facility, where MS-13 and Barrio 18 members share cells, despite being mortal enemies. Inmates are pictured exercising at El Salvador's terrorism confinement center, but they are confined to their cells for the vast majority of their incarceration. Marvin Recinos, AFP. They are watched 24 hours a day by CCTV cameras and guards. AFP visited the prison with other international media on Monday. During the tour, prison director Belarmino Garcia referred to the inmates as psychopaths who will be difficult to rehabilitate, adding, "That's why they are here, in a maximum security prison that they will never leave." Garcia ordered the inmates in one cell to take off their shirts to reveal bodies tattooed with intricate images of women, tombstones, and skulls and crosses, as well as gang insignia. No way out. The MS-13 and Barrio 18 have terrorized El Salvador since the late 1990s in their fight for drug and extortion rackets. Marvin Medrano, a 41-year-old sentenced to more than 100 years in prison, shows off his tattoos alluding to the MS-13 gang during an interview with AFP inside the Terrorism Confinement Center mega prison in El Salvador. Marvin Recinos, AFP. They also have a presence in Guatemala and Honduras. Speaking in a small room next to the cells, watched by a group of police officers, a 41-year-old nicknamed Psycho, pronounced Psycho, told AFP he regretted his violent past. "We are in a maximum security prison where we know there is no way out," he said. Marvin Medrano, serving a 100-year sentence for 2 murders, lifted his shirt to show AFP the initials MS for Mara Salvatrucha, or MS-13, tattooed on his torso. Medrano was born in El Salvador, but spent part of his childhood in the United States, where he joined a gang aged about 12. He returned to his homeland in 2001 to escape attempted murder charges and founded an MS-13 cell in the southwestern port city of La Libertad. He lamented what he called his bad decisions and said he hoped his son, whose age he did not specify, would take a different path in life. Over 80,000 Salvadorans have been detained since President Nayib Bukele declared a state of emergency after a surge in gang violence in 2022. Marvin Recinos, AFP. "I have lost my family. We've lost everything in prison," Medrano told the visiting reporters. Over 80,000 Salvadorans have been detained since Bukele declared the state of emergency. In November, the president acknowledged that 8,000 innocent people were among those rounded up. They have since been released. The Socorro Jurídico Humanitario Rights Group estimates that almost a third of those detained are innocent. 2025 AFP.